Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of the Data Sense podcast. This is the show where you learn from technical and business leaders how to connect business and data to develop your own sense to use data to drive your business forward. Today we have Joanna Marsh. Joanna is a General Manager, Innovation and Advanced Analytics at Investor Property Group, and also co-founder of an early-stage data science platform for real estate. Welcome to the show, Joanna. You must have a very long career. Currently, you are a general manager at Investor Property Group and a co-founder as well. What has brought you here from your early stages of career? How did you end up being in property? And what do you like about property?
It's a great question. So I've been in property my whole career. And so that's now almost 18 years, right? Because I'm getting old. And what I would say about property, so property is the largest asset class in the world, about $200 trillion, depending on who you ask. Different people have different metrics on that, but it's a massive business and it's the equivalent of the stock and the bond markets combined. And it's a huge driver of wealth in our society. So I started my career, I was up at Harvard studying neuroscience and ended up working for a bank actually in property. So I was on the finance side at the beginning, and we did construction lending and permanent debt takeouts and those sort of things. So I learned it really from the numbers and was a Excel jockey and built the valuation models and learned it that way. And then ended up starting my own property company, the first entrepreneurial pursuit I did, into the GFC. And that didn't go so well, needless to say. So we wound that down. And then since then, I moved to Australia. So I'm in Sydney. And I've had various different senior roles in investment, in capital transactions, in strategy, strategic operations. And throughout my career, I keep finding myself coming further and further up the curve in R&D and innovation. So, investment and all these things are great. And you keep going, well, that's interesting. I wonder if we could do that. And then I wonder if we can do that. So then I was in innovation, went up and studied design thinking at Stanford, learned a few things there, and went, well, this is great, but all the qualitative is only one side. What about the quant? What about the exhaust of human behavior that's reflected in data? So then I started learning about that. And hence now I lead analytics and advanced analytics. And so during that time period, it was just an evolution of a career, I guess, through an industry and, different countries of the world. And what used to be, I didn't know what data was before. It was just an edge I needed to win a deal. So if we had a certain piece of information that, someone else didn't have, that gave us an unfair, an information advantage, for example, in the negotiation. So that was just something we needed to know. I now know that it's a data point and it has metadata and has all this other stuff. Back then, I didn't. I was just going, we're hunting for an edge. And so that leads me, then I met my co-founder, Will Cosby, who's amazing. Met him through all the work we're doing at Investa, and he's highly technical CTO. And we started looking at why analytics companies have only been successful in real estate in very small point solutions, not in transformation. There's no Bloomberg for real estate. There's no ticker for a building. There's no information layer that then is an innovation surface that everyone can, innovate on in terms of data. So we started looking at that and went, whoa, there's a massive opportunity here. So we've been building from there.
That's quite interesting. And one thing I've seen about real estate is that it's quite different in different countries as well. UK is different. America is different. Australia, I've seen some documentaries on Australian real estate. It's quite different. So I guess that also gives you an opportunity to explore real estate from different angles on, taking advantage of local laws, right?
Yes, the laws are different. The data is different. The customer behavior and, what we want as humans out of the built environment is different. What I would say, the core fundamentals of it as an asset class is the same. So it's just about translating. And this is something that for all the tech entrepreneurs listening, something that is really important because a lot of global real estate companies are in 15, 18 gateway cities globally. And the real estate companies don't want to have to buy 18 different solutions and then knit them together inside of their architecture. So being able to translate your tech from market to market is a skill in itself. So the fundamentals of really, if you think about office space, your office lease is a SaaS product with a geolocation.
Interesting.
So in the end, you're renting a block of space and a geolocation over time with certain services over the top, your Pilates classes, all the things you have in your office space. So given that, the SaaS product is different city to city and country to country, but in the end, humans need space.
Yeah. Okay. That's a really interesting way of looking at it. It's a SaaS product with a geolocation. That's quite interesting. And I remember we worked with a housing agency in the UK. We had a project which was basically a data project, and the challenge they had was basically they had like 50,000 properties they owned or managed in and around London. So one major company doing that, I was like really exciting. And the work they were doing was that they had like 50,000 leases, and these leases are sometimes two leases, land lease as well as property lease, sometimes just one. And then they also have gas certificates, electrical certificates, and all sorts of other documents for each property. And they simply obviously had scanned it, right? They got it on the computer, but they have no idea how to go through that data. 50,000, that's a lot. So one of the projects we did was basically digitize all of that. So bring it into actually the data world. So it's scanned, right? Now you bring the data from those documents into the Excel files or Excel sort of views, and then you extract information based on which boiler is located where, which one is the oldest one, which one is like at least 40 years old that needs to be replaced first, and all sorts of those questions that you can only answer if your data is in a good place, in a single place. And then you can obviously, create queries. So that's the sort of one aspect of understanding, how data can be used with properties, which I've seen. Obviously, there are multiple other sort of ways, which I'm sure you are working on. So with that, what's the big challenge you're working on currently, or current project with the Investor Property Group?
So there's a number of them, and Investa's at the cutting edge. And our platform is half owned by Oxford Properties. And they also have a cutting edge data science team, which is really great. I do a lot of work with Dean Hopkins, who's their global COO, partner in crime. And we kind of are pushing the bounds and the edge of analytics and real estate together. And we're working on a lot of different things. So if you think about what a property company has to do, so we have to buy, either land and then develop it, or we have to buy assets. We have to attract capital in order to pay for that, whether that's debt or equity. So we have to hunt capital, we have to hunt assets or land. Then we have to design those and have those assets actually, meet market demand. Then we have to lease the assets. So the leasing, whether it's residential or commercial, that's another entire model. And then you have to operate the assets. So some of the buildings, everyone will have heard of Internet of Things, right? And the sensors, they're getting quite sophisticated in certain ways. There's 22,000 sensors on 60 Martin Place, which is one of the office buildings that Investa manages. So there's a lot of data flowing off. But again, what do you do with it, right? And then from there, there's the reporting. So we have to report up. And reporting is getting more and more ESG and sustainability driven. So the real focus there is how do we actually digitize and then collect the ESG data that we need to drive the ESG returns as well, and also to report constantly. So if you think about kind of the value chain in real estate, there's data science use cases behind all of those. And as we started doing the thin slices, what we found is they start using the overlapping data sets, which, we got to the point where it's insufficient for one company or even two, even the size of Oxford Property, right? It's insufficient to be building this kind of infrastructure inside one company. So that's how the data science platform was born. We went, look, the problem is there's hundreds and hundreds of data sets, and real estate is specifically hard to do this because everything is geolocated. Addresses, as you know, are hard, and you might have 2 towers on one site. What do you do? And not only that, there's huge data gaps, but then also huge floods of data. So the sensor data is massive and frequent, but the average office building trades every 7 years. And there's one data, but there's massive context, very deep and contextual. So the way I like to explain where real estate is real estate is where the stock market was when there was physical trading floors. And you had to be on the floor, hyper local experience. And our teams are so masterful. What they can keep in their head and the math and the Excel spreadsheets is just extraordinary. And when NASDAQ came in and not only disseminated the fact you could buy and sell on electronic exchange, but also made it possible to get the information, more quickly and outside of having to be in the physical floor, all of a sudden innovation flowed in. And, now we have Robinhood and, Reddit and GameStop and the whole world came on top of that innovation layer. So what I would say about real estate is we need to connect up all of the different data sets. And then we need to have a frame of reference, like the ticker symbols per building. And that's a very hard engineering problem. So some of the stuff we're doing in Investa are along that entire value chain. So I'll build on what you just said about the leases. So lease documents are fascinating. I don't know if you've ever you've read them because you've digitized a bunch of them, but they can be 70 pages long. They have a huge amount of information in them. And in general, you might keep the little summary page of 20 fields, right? So you start to think about, like you said, the assets in the building, the chillers, the fans, that sort of stuff. The next step is, I don't want to know just about my buildings. We want to know about every building. So then we pull all the development approval data every time a chiller is replaced, every time. So we start to do that. That's very text heavy data, which is often how it is in real estate. So natural language processing expertise, that sort of thing. And you start to know, the building next door, they have deferred maintenance. They haven't replaced their chillers. That's interesting. And as you start building up the layers of understanding across the entire market, you start to hone in your hunting machines. So we're doing that with leasing, and we're doing it with acquisitions.
So yeah, that's quite interesting. Now the thing is, you've mentioned quite a few interesting points here. With so much opportunities in data, how do you focus on something? Because obviously you can continuously improve on the quality of data. So one example in the UK, you may know of Ordnance Survey. They are a maps company, and they continuously improve their maps. So there's a constant evolution of schema and I guess constant evolution of the data resolution or the data quality. So they keep on scanning, they keep on sending their aeroplanes across the UK, and they have extremely high quality lasers and high resolution cameras. And they're just scanning all the time. And as they're scanning, they basically save the data, and then it's always constantly being updated with the latest data. And these days, they even know the location of every single tree in the UK. That's how accurate it is. So obviously, you can continuously improve, and obviously, you can provide that as an API to other companies, and even the government would probably use that. So the question is, how do you find the revenue so that, you can keep on making that money as well as you're improving data quality, gathering more data, improving the resolution of the data across all the data points?
It's a good question. From my business leader hat, right? The data itself has no value to us unless it can be ingested into something that drives forward the corporate strategy. That's it. So while there's inherent value, you might get different value than I do out of the data based on the capability of your teams, right? So one thing is we've built a very robust multivariate decision analysis model, MCDA decision model, that allows us to evaluate the long tail of use cases against the corporate strategy. So we've got our corporate strategic goals, business-wise. Then we have other criteria, is it like a fit to our capability, time to return, impact of scale, and does it leverage existing other data sets that we might have? So we're continually adding use cases as we come across them into, and then we run an efficient frontier. So we basically say, if you've got, I don't know, $5 million to spend, what are the 10 that are going to give you the biggest bang for your buck against your corporate strategy, leveraging the data and the capability you already have? And that's the way you talk to executives, because you go, here's your ROI, and here's the bottom line, and here's what you're building. It also really helps with the tech teams because it gives them the license to go, this is why we're doing it, this is why we're spending the money, and this is why we need you to listen. So it's really important to bridge that business strategy, data analytics gap, because so many leaders of data and analytics, they can't pin it to the strategy. And they can't just borrow. And this is my, banker stuff coming back out. But I'm like, we just translate this into ROI. And there's a couple of places in real estate specifically you pin to growth. And growth has two kinds of, fees, management fees and deal fees. And so you pin into those. And, if you're listening to this, don't think just real estate. Think of the businesses. And if you're selling into corporate, this is really important. Which revenues are you going to pin into? And then the second thing is you protect risk. So get the risk registers, and, the product or the use case you have is a mitigant to a business risk that reduces it and has a trailing risk that is lower, right? So you're protecting risk. Those are the two really big ones. And then, of course, there's efficiencies as well, which you can measure. But speaking the language of the board and the exec who's going to approve the use cases, and also the users in all these businesses, right? Because they have to spend their time working with us. So you got to make it worth their while.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you basically, you mentioned exactly what I wanted to hear, the ROI. Basically, seeing how you could extract ROI, get the biggest bang from the buck, basically, of whatever money you spend. So that's it. When we work on data projects, one of the things we do is we basically say, okay, fine, let's list down, say, 10 business pain points, right? Say a company has a lot of money and they're like, we want to be a data-driven company now. We want to be an AI company now, right? So the way we address that is we say, well, the first thing we need to do is let's list down 10 business pain points or business goals. And then based on those, we look at the lowest hanging fruit, the one that can be done the easiest, the first, with the data that's already available in the company, or it only needs to be bought, right? So that we can prove the point that, yes, it makes sense to do more data. Once you have got the lowest hanging fruit, then you can do more projects, get more buy-in from other executives and everything. So, and then the other bit is that once you actually do deliver, or you are working on a project, then one important bit is that ROI calculation. So if we do a project, will it give us more, return more than what we are going to invest in doing it? Basically, gathering the data, paying for the salaries of data engineers, machine learning engineers if needed, and everything. And then what's the end value? Can we get more out of that once the data is processed? So that's basically a big question. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. So you mentioned a very interesting challenge in the beginning of the podcast. What's the, how do you solve that? Is it a continuous, do you have to hire a lot of people, a lot of data engineers? How do you solve that challenge of gathering the data, or the technical challenge? Yeah.
Gathering the disparate sets of data. It's so in real estate, and it's why I really am blessed that I've been in real estate my whole career, right? So in a world where there isn't the Bloomberg, what an industry has to do is we invent rules of thumb. We invent ways of shortcutting, not having the depth of data, right? If you only have so many comparables and you don't have the 50,000 now that we watch in Sydney, if you only have a small set, there's mental extrapolations and calculations that we all do. And in your hyperlocal market, that's excellent. But if you take me and put me in a market I don't know, like Boston, I have to come up, actually not Boston because I went to school there, but a market I don't know, like LA, for example, I would have to come up the curve where someone who's there can walk by a building and go, that feels like a 5 cap, like multiplier. So the thing with that is amazing expertise in a hyper-local area by real estate practitioners, but not, so you know how you like do a thing manually and then you replicate it and then you scale it, not scalable. So the opportunity is to make it really scalable, and you can actually move it anywhere you want to go. And imagine, largest asset class in the world, the hedge funds and everyone is from the outside is going, how can we do this? So the first thing is we need to harness the expertise of the industry because it's so nuanced that often how analytics companies fail and data scientists and engineers, they fail in real estate because they bring things from the financial services or insurance, models that work, and they try to apply it to a non-fungible asset in a fixed environment without a lot of data, or the data is highly contextual. And so they don't change the way they do things. And then they do this big expensive projects. And then they come at the end and say, here's an answer. And we go, yeah, no, duh. Like we walk down the street. Like, of course I know that. Right. So there's the real estate industry in a lot of ways have been burned by what seems like false promises and seems like these things that just, it hasn't been adapted. So the first thing you do is you really go, like, I'm very humble about this. And I go, okay, like a lot of the flash, we're not there yet. We are at the atom level, not at the alchemy level. And part of it is going, okay, what does it mean? What is the polygon of this building? Like, what does it mean? Where is it? What does that piece of data mean? So that's being willing to do the work. Secondly is really looking at, there's so many open data sets around the built environment. So the hard part of it is, back to your point about granularity, deciding the requisite granularity you need for the problem at that time and not going too deep, but then getting enough granularity so you're down to the source. So a great example is we were looking at a bunch of stuff in Sydney and we wanted to know at a site level the entire transaction history of every site. And we wanted to match that with all the rental history, the residential rental history. And you can sort of scavenger together and buy little bits of these data sets around. But it's highly expensive and it's not particularly verified. So Will, my co-founder, and I sat down, and I sit there from the real estate and he sits there with 8 screens and technical and, coding as I talk, right? And we started following the thread on the sweater. So I went, okay, well, where is that data going to be? And so we found all the transaction data from the Valuer General, which is the government in New South Wales. So, Will pulls down the 6 million rows and starts, so bang. And I'm like, okay, rental data, where is that going to be? Like, okay, listings isn't where it, but that isn't what they leased it for. So I'm thinking to myself and I go, no, bond data, first, last, and security. So I go, okay, where's that? And so then we're following this thread. We find the bond data, but it's just a little bit of a interface on the front of a website. Like, oh, this isn't, I don't like this. And Will, 3 seconds later, is I'm in, I got it. And so he engineers it and then brings it in and we start to pin it together. But the technical side, like, Will doesn't understand the anomalies like I do, given the background. So he'll pull up, what do you think? And to him, it's a number. And I go, ooh, glitch, cool. Let's follow that thread. So had he just removed the anomalies, he would have lost the value in these data sets. So how you do it is you sit your SME next to you, not I have to get on your schedule in a week and a half and get a feedback cycle that's really low. You sit your engineer, your data engineer, and your SME next to each other and you co-build, because that way it's fast. So 48 hours later, with a couple hours of sleep, we had the data set and it's done. So now it's live and engineered and piped in. That's the big key. So often the technical teams are sitting somewhere and they're going and getting feedback from the business side, and it's too slow. And then with the insights that it is are too obvious. So I think that's a very key thing, especially in real estate, to give that SME view.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. So yeah, that's quite interesting how you solve that problem. And yeah, sometimes you have to, if it's a new problem that requires multiple levels of expertise, one being the domain expertise, one requiring the actual coding expertise, then you have to basically sit down together and try to solve that. It's the if the and what you mentioned initially was where if someone comes from the financial background, and then they obviously bring their models or even their how they think of the problems, right? They bring their whole thought process with it. Then it might be difficult. And the what you actually need is someone from a domain expertise of real estate, and then understand, okay, you know what, this is how we need to apply it. We need to think of it in a different way. So yeah, exactly. When we work with customers, our clients, we make sure the problem they are trying to solve, either we have expertise in or they have expertise in. So if they have a domain expertise in that, and then they can advise us on how it'll work out, then it's worth solving. But if they don't, then it doesn't make sense. For example, one project, someone quoted what they needed was like a camera on a building that can see, even up to like 30 meters away, everyone, and scan their faces and basically identify their names just from one camera. And I'm like, that's straight out of science fiction. And I'm not even sure if you have the expertise. Like it can't be done. You don't even have the pictures of the people who are there. So how would you actually train the model? So it's a lot of those things where sometimes if they're trying to do something where they don't have expertise at all, and they are thinking it's, data engineers or machine learning engineers are magicians. So by magic, this will be done.
Exactly. And to be clear, I'm not saying it won't work. It's just there's a flexibility required to move it over. And it's not as easy as plugging a churn model for fraud into a churn model for a tenant or into a churn model. There's a nuance to any shift that we need to work through. So nothing wrong, just unless you're ready for it, it can be pretty shocking when you get in. And the best laid plans, what is that? I'm going to butcher this quote, but the best laid plans never survive contact with the enemy. And so it's kind of about the shift to aggressively prototyping versus spending months and months getting specs and talking about it when people can't see it, touch it, feel it. Instead, aggressively prototyping, mucking in, and then looking at it and go, okay, now what do we feel about it? And I think that's the way that I've seen it be really successful.
Yeah, that makes sense. And the thing is that I've seen both models. Sometimes if you have to explore something new, then prototyping is the way. You simply get into code and you work and you see, does that work? Does that work? Explore. So you're right. Sometimes it's exactly that what you need, basically. Sometimes it's the other way. Sometimes, you have the spec and you can go and engineer if it's a pretty typical laid out web app or something like that. Yeah. So what's one thing that you advocate in technology that you haven't seen happen yet, but you know what, you would love to see it?
I'm really passionate about giving people confidence to play with data, taking the complexity out of it so that not just, you've got the senior data engineers, and then you've got in real estate, you've got the Excel analysts, the investment analysts, the leasing analysts, right? They're still technical. You then have, head of occupant experience, you have marketing, so there's an entire technical range. And in my world, like Canva took what was a technical graphic design, you need to learn InDesign, that entire process, and made it accessible for everyone with templates. So that's what we're really trying to do with our startup, is not only do the Bloomberg, but have Bloomberg meets Canva so that it's very accessible for everyone, which also takes the load off your high-end data engineers who don't want to be told by me for the 14th time, can you change the color of that graph? So that's a really big one, is that accessibility and fairness for people to be able to get their hands on it. The other thing I would love to see is senior leaders working with the hairy data in the wild. Like actually I remember the first time, because it's all very theoretical. And then the first time I actually opened up some of these data sets and I'm going, whoa, and then I learned Open Refine and I'm starting to thrash. And you actually get to understand what your tech teams are telling you, like viscerally. So you get a real honor for when you say, oh, can you just do a X? And they're like, no. So part of that too is I'd love senior leaders everywhere to just experience the grit and the friction and what it's like. And also the anomalies and the wow factors and the gold that's in the data that you can't see if you're not mired in it and really spending time in it. So that was the big aha moment for me, I think, in the last couple of years. Like, jump in and see what's going on.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. Yeah, that is. It's a very nice way of looking at it. Working with the raw data. You mentioned about the platform where you would like a Canva of data, so that people can play with it, basically. So the thing is that there are obviously, I've seen there's some platforms, right? And even when I talk to some clients, what they say is that we like Excel, right? Only that Excel needs to be on the cloud, right? And then the thing is that Excel is sort of on the cloud. It's available. There is also Google Sheets, which is a really great platform because you can connect to it. You can push data into it. You can take data out of it very easily. You can have data connectors. And, but then there's that, one thing I feel with data engineering is that there could be certain sources of data where you do need a data engineer to bring in the data, at least to a level of, say, JSON files or CSV files, so that they can be ingested into a platform. Because sometimes if the data is on a website and it's on a form, it's on a table, but it needs to be scrapped off. Now you would need to write the code to get that data off and put it onto into a CSV file or JSON file, and then bring it into, say, like an Excel or a Google Sheet, and do the analysis there. So that's where I feel like, although, yeah, it makes sense. And also, yeah, I agree with the changing of color. You wouldn't want to ask a data engineer to do that every time, and you want to do it yourself. And I think one great thing about, I guess you've worked with Tableau, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Tableau does something similar, but Tableau is also it's doing certain things back in the back, which you have no idea what it's doing. So that's the other challenge, where there's a platform that does, okay, you can draw your own graphs, you can manipulate data in your own way. But then if you ask a data engineer, okay, this is how we've got this now, dashboard, can you do something on top of this now? And the data engineers are like, how do I do that? Like, it's not even in code. I have to first reproduce this in code and then take it further. So that's the other challenge, where they're like, too many different platforms that have different formats of how they actually work in the background. So that's the other sort of challenge with that.
Yeah, you have to get to the raw data. So from every panel, we build, you have to be able to click and go straight to where it is, because you have to be able to say, there's the anomaly, right? So one of the different things we need to be able to do is we need to be able to blend data sets. So in real estate, like, our research, for example, house view models, they might have 56 or 60 data sets that are all live data that they need. So you break Excel pretty fast, and only at 10,000 rows, 100,000 rows, like, you don't get millions of rows. So I think one is the sheer volume and speed, and then the blending, right? And then you, of course, want the audit trail for all the engineering that's been done on the data and the metadata.
Yeah.
And then you want to be able to lock down the Chinese walls for real estate, because if we have two funds, we need to now not share certain fields of data. So we need to be able to lock those down. So you've got all that, and it has to go down to the live data sets. And then you want to be able to save things like all your queries and calculations as flows. So that's all fairly standard. In real estate, it's harder, but as you start to build it up, it's fairly standard. The thing I really am passionate about is open sourcing all the panels and data sets and turning it into something where people can build and sell and, monetize and actually, all the nonprofits, because for example, if you want to put social housing somewhere as a social housing enterprise, you need all that data, and you can't afford the the high-end data engineers to do it. Even if it's free data sitting on data.gov, you have to wrangle it. And those nested merge fields in Excel, like you've known them, right? So there's an inaccessibility.
Yeah.
You either need the skill or be able to pay for the skill. And then there's a sheer horsepower, but also an innovation, right? Because the entire point is you might see something that I don't see, and so you build something I don't build, and then the innovation flows in. So for me, it's very much a not social infrastructure, but infrastructure that everyone can contribute and build on. And it also doesn't want to be expensive. So that's the other key thing. This stuff is hideously expensive, and the prices are dropping. But to even maintain a handful of data sets over time with engineers, if the data is changing much, you're looking at a massive investment. Yeah. And what that does back to the ROI conversation is it forces really high ROI calcs. So it makes it really hard to innovate and try something, because now if it costs you $1 million, you better get some kind of return similar to that, where, my big commitment is a lot of it's free and then it's really cheap. And that in that way, the ROI burden and the business case burden isn't on every single project. So I think that's where that's going.
Interesting. That's quite interesting. Yeah. Yeah, I agree with the ROI conversation. It has to be higher if there's you have to maintain it, or you have to keep on maintaining. Yeah.
There's so much pressure, right? There's so much pressure on the technical team. If we go hook up a massive, we're going to spend all this money and do this big use case, if it doesn't happen and happen fast, the scrutiny is there, where you probably can't predict that on the outset at all until you get into the data anyway. So I think reducing that hurdle and burden for everyone is really important to innovation.
Cool. Okay, that's quite interesting. So that brings us to the end of the episode. Joanna, we can find you on LinkedIn. We'll link that profile in the links in the description below. Thank you for being on the show so much.
You're welcome. It's great to be here.
Thank you. See ya.